The Witcher, Hexer, Chapter 12. Lost History or Hidden. Naga are the known serpentine people of the world that have lived in the netherworlds of the underworld underground beneath the world of mankind. Their kingdom has always been divided, and the history of the Viper Witchers tells the whole truth of their origins on Earth. These serpent people were here on the new Earth before most of the pre-human people, long before humanity's birth. When some astral visitors came in the early days of man, who were the same as Nagans but different, a type of jealousy naturally occurred with the underground snake people against the visitors who stayed to teach the first Viper Witchers. And so, the Naga sided with the evil sorcerers among the early humans, like the one known as the Count. The serpentine people of the underworld, where S came from, dwelled in a part of the Nagan dwelling place under the earth. The jealousy arose when the visitors came from the obliterated, destroyed constellation through the other side of the void, which ripped through the aftermath of the conjunction of the spheres. The story told was a fabricated lie told by the underground snake people out of their jealousy. They told the story that one killed the other after conceiving a child with a human mother. Only no one knew which of the two killed the other, and who was the father between the one who left and the one who stayed behind. The real truth was that the two serpent people who were visitors from beyond the stars, like Trilsum before Trilsum, were not two men, but a man and a woman. They had conceived a child on Earth who would become the first Viper Witcher, and that there was a great argument between them because the serpentine woman visitor had an affair accidentally with an impersonator who was a Nagan pretending to be her husband. This child became the one who impregnated a human, and that conception was actually twins that separated between the Viper Witchers and the Naga of the underworld. The one twin stayed to be the half-human Witcher to teach the ways of his parents, who did not leave back beyond the stars, but whose parents both were murdered by the deceiver who was a Nagan. The other twin of the two snake brothers, the one who stayed with the Naga, would be cast under a spell from the half-elf, half-dwarf sorceress during the time of the first Forest Kingdom. This gave rise to more trickery and deception from the Netherworld Naga. That second queen of the forest, who had already betrayed her parents, became impregnated through the family curse of the half-human, half-snake man that was the offspring of the visitors. That twin who did not stay in bondage with the pact of the Viper Witchers, but who was taken by the false truce of the Naga. Lies always changed the course of history throughout time, and in turn, this brought down kingdoms into darkness through vile curses of the underworld that otherwise would have flourished in peace and harmony, with only good tidings and blessings instead of the continuous tragedies that would befall kingdoms like the Forest Kingdom. Lies changed everything every time, and this was the power evil always possessed. Lies changed the course of time, with the changing of humanity, when there became a need to combat the cosmic monsters, manipulating natural humans, turning them into hexers, who eventually became witchers, mutating men's blood, turning them into bestial killers, whose instincts were that of a snake or a wolf. When they needed to eat, they killed and ate. When they needed to fuck, they fucked by any means available. This was the corruption brought by the necessity of combating the monsters. It created more monsters among men, and more discord, which brought more and more division, and wars eventually broke out through banishment and persecution between the pre-human people and the human race. Thankfully, there still were a few good Viper Witchers who held true to the good precepts that were solid foundations laid before them by those good ones who scattered about, just like the white wolves of the Witchers like Geralt of Rivia. Geralt knew of them. But until these times of the coming of Trilzom, he never had to actually deal with him personally. Times had changed, and Geralt was in the midst of many continuous battles, none of which he could face alone, no matter how much he wished to do so. Many battles he would fight alone, but there were too many counterparts that did not allow this, considering the war between the newly formed kingdom of Duny and Pavetta, who had inherited an already strong new kingdom that had arisen from the good sea creatures and sea people. They would be fighting against the Queen of the Sea and the chaos she created, even more so with her children from Trilzom. Then there were the ones who were warring between the people of the forest. Those humans who were fighting for their land throughout the continent against monsters that were mere pawns of S and Trilzom. Once Geralt of Rivia came down with the Master Sorceress Yennefer from Divina Calicata, without much exploration of the high-floating land, this created a whole new element of the newly forming war between warring peoples. The few who did not fall from the descending monsters of the highest places within the hills of Divina Calicata became enjoined with Geralt and Yennefer. There were 4 giants among them now who were the size of Queen Cyrene, Queen of the Sea. These were 2 couples who were older, that long ago lost their children and retreated to the high place in solitude. They only joined the cause out of their good conscience. They didn't know what else to do, since they saw many of their friends who became family fall off the edge of the world, seemingly to their deaths. The remaining elves who joined Yennefer and Geralt were pleased to learn that Yennefer herself was half-elf, and took a liking to her especially. There were 9 of these elves, who were 3 generations of the same family by their grandchildren, made up of 4 grandparents, which were 2 elder couples, grandmother, grandfather, grandpa, grandma, their son and daughter, who became married, and their 3 children, all boys who were trained to be great elven warriors, who were taught to be masters of the enchanted blades of their swords. The dwarves were many, who joined with Geralt and Yennefer since, like the gnomes, stayed to the back of the pack naturally, as they came from their places within their palace of the inner caverns of Divina Calicata. These dwarves were incredibly strong and were heroes of men, because they taught the men of Divina Calicata how to become stronger. What they lacked in height, these Divina Calicatan dwarves more than made up for in strength and sharpness of mind. Unlike the dwarves of the earth below, they did not have to resort to the underground conditions or the high places of the mountains there, which many of them became either affected by the high altitude or the lower air quality of the underground above the underworld dwelling place of the Naga. The atmosphere was different up there around the otherworldly Divina Calicata, even inside their caverns. A mystical, majestic energy emanated from their land inside and out, which made their air quality much better than that of Earth. The concentrated atmospheric energy within their cavernous palace gave them the best of the best possible quality of air, therefore enriching their land and mineral water with such good rare purification that nothing like it could be found anywhere else. This was the biggest blessing from the fantastical merging of 2 worlds that were never meant to be. The magnetic force that counteracts each other, being a fully formed Earth being orbited by a destroyed giant planet's remnant, well, that current of alternating energy between 2 sources made a series of both good and bad after effects. The obvious bad, as previously mentioned, surely was the earthly damage from collision, as well as the gravitational pulling, which caused commotion and disturbance between the waters, and deep plates under the ocean and land above, shifting most unnaturally the continents, while causing quakes and splitting of continents, while land was rearranged over time much quicker than what otherwise naturally would have taken place. So these dwarves were not outnumbered, but were in the hundreds, each of them being skilled in combat, with their choice weapons to be the ones only the strong could wield, those being either hammer or axe. Some had variations between the two, which were hammer axe, while others were scythe-styled pickaxe or pickaxe hammers. Then there were the gnomes, who could become visible and were also not numbered but had to be in the hundreds if one were to count. They did not need weapons because with their magic they themselves were weapons that could do many things unseen. On Earth they could not successfully stay invisible for long because of the corrupted magic from many malevolent magic spells. So these wise ones from Divina became blessed with abundant curse-free atmospherical power from the otherworldly high place floating above Earth below, where the curse lie. The few humans left up top of Divina who were not forced off the edge were numbered only 7 of them. There were 2 couples, one with an only child son and the other couple having 2 daughters. They learned the wizardry of the elves and their old ways, since it was their ancestors who helped them escape the elven persecution. The Divina dwarves taught these humans their ways of smithing their axes and hammers, but applied the metal forging knowledge from the elves to make them swords like their enchanted blades in all their magical power. So these humans possessed swords that were strong like the dwarf hammer and the axe, yet hexed with precision skill so that a strike would never be anything other than swift and most often fatal. As wars were waged and all sides had been put in place, the only thing left to do was fight. The benevolent ones had no desire to do so, yet in an instant were creatures who were the readiest of battle. Exhilarating decisions were made throughout the highest of intelligence in the animal kingdom, particularly of the sea creatures. Those old white whales, along with other whales, had some among them that were most pleased. Those who were gifted with the miracle of speech through communicative brain signal waves, as well as their type of noise that intensified their telepathicism. Then, also equally as excited were the magnificent, benevolent creatures who were like animals of the animal kingdom, but with slight to less than slight characteristics or qualities to make them stand out. The commonality between them was always a larger size with these creatures compared to the animals they resembled or came from. How many times did Geralt or Yennefer dream into reality, or see reality fade into dream? Same could be said of Pavetta or Duni for that matter, no one knows. The only thing that can be for certain is that both were valid, and events happened. No matter how many times things were recalled, changed by the off-scale magnitude of shifts, along with the churning of the atmospheric changes, what mattered in the end was the final result of things to bring conclusions to everything. After many changes through recollection, hexation was just another series of layers to this complex doing and undoing cycle brought on by Trilizom, ultimately. This must be described thoroughly, since there were so many accounts of The Witcher. When Geralt came back down to Earth with Yennefer from Divina, their group had become an army. When they would come back, all their memories of the floating continent would begin to dissipate yet again. Now they understood what happened before, and so Yennefer caught the moment in a hex just in time, so that the memories would not be lost in the bad luck that followed from the cursed path of the otherworldly steps. Just as Geralt of Rivia watched Yennefer's feet touch ground, his boots hit the last step of a small floating island, which was the remnant of the ones that collided. This jumping from one to the other was like a fun game for them, but not so much for all the companies that followed. For those who followed them down the island steps from Divina, They were a bit frustrated in the difficult descent. Nothing was fun for them until they forced themselves to enjoy it a bit. Some of the elves caught themselves smiling and laughing, while mostly everyone else did not crack a smile. This said a lot about the current situation. When it seemed that everyone in their company was safe and sound, something truly shocking happened. Trilsom came down directly in front of Gerald and Yennefer, challenging them, as if testing them. In a flash of a split second, Trilsom was there, floating in front of the Witcher and Sorceress, sitting in the air with his legs crossed and folded in the styled posture he usually flew, in this type of meditative state pose. Many people of the land came down to the place where Geralt and Yennefer had come to, in this large, pitted area like an amphitheater in the forest clearing. It was a place where events took place that were convenient for all surrounding towns and could easily come to. Trilsom floated in the middle of the open center, sitting in the air calmly as he addressed the crowds. The monsters come now from the place at which you look from above, this Divina Calicata. Even as you look upon the fabled land, it is no more, for I have already destroyed it with the judgment that has been postponed. Trilsom rarely smiled in his existence, but this was a time when he was most satisfied with himself. "You're a real monster," the High King of the Dwarves from the now exploding Divina Calicata held his beloved queen wife as she said these words in response. "There's no denying what I am. I'll tell you of my secrets, since you are now seeing for yourselves my power and my revenge fulfilled. I am of the same species as these who come down to your earth, only I was gifted with this mind of mine, which is my curse all unto itself." Trilsom truly believed his words, as they rang true for the huge crowds from all the land heard what he had to say. The people that resided all around the territory of the Forest Castle Kingdom were there as captivated, watching spectators. They saw the falling of Divina Calicata before anyone who came down, as the full moon was in perfect alignment behind. The entire descent, no one cared to look back. Their only care was to look at one foot in front of the other in concentration as not to fall. Trilsom's species descended after the other monsters who came and rushed the people of Divina Calicata down the island stems and off the edge. The ones in front of the Trilsom species were the large bull-like monsters. They looked like long-horned bulls, only with very different faces. Their skin was like darkened copper or bronze, with hooves that were like sharpened scoopers that tore out chunks of everything they landed on, disheveling the ground with every heavy step. Considering the faces of these particular monsters, it was no wonder why everyone went tumbling off the edge, and also not looking back while the rest of them escaped. Their eyes were abnormally long, like their horns, and were just under where the horns sprouted out of the top sides of their large, wide heads. Their brows were wrinkled like a brain and gave the impression that they were the most angry-looking beasts that were ever born. Their eyes were pure black, if it weren't for this weirdly odd red marble glow inside, like freshly blown glass that had been mixed with those colors absolute black and blood red. Those eyes were so oddly oblong and queer, it was unnatural to the point of unsettling stomachs of whoever looked into them. The bridge of their nose was so very odd. The nostrils went outward, along with the separated bridge of the nose, and the whole thing on the faces of the creatures looked like U-shaped arches that had been separated from each other, almost like tubed hooks covered with baggy flesh, covered with short fur, with nostrils at the end of them. Finally, their mouths looked like something you didn't want to see. they defied nature on Earth. With a retracting throat, their mouths looked like they had necks inside instead of tongues, and there were no visible teeth because their teeth were deeply lined within those baggy esophaguses. As for the otherworldly monster species called Trilzom, they looked like their estranged father. They were named after Lord Trilzom for the most part. The only difference was their mouths were 3 times the size, although they had much larger jaws and teeth in those predatory mouths. Trilzom did not eat human flesh like the Trilzom monsters did. He did not require food in the conventional ways that creatures eat, because his own skin took in from the environment all his celestial body needed to live eternally. He would have lived on immortally if he had never become so destructively selfish once he came to Earth. But his greed for power brought Trilzom's death that day in the most unexpected of ways. Trilzom stood atop the continent of Divinacalicata as he brought it lower to the earth in front of the forest amphitheater, so that all could see and hear what he had to say. The immense pressure from the unnatural pull by Trilzom's power made everyone scream in terror as the magnetic field around the earth constricted, making people's heads hurt with uncomfortable piercing migraines. Trilzom didn't have to stand with his feet on the ground of Divinacalicata, yet there he was. Since Trilzom could have flown anywhere he wished while bringing the continent down with his incredible power, there was no need for him to stand so proudly on Divinacalicata. Yet this proud act initiated the beginning of his fall by his own lofty doing. Trilzom spoke no words as he had planned to, before his own kind devoured him in a frenzied pile. The crowds expected some kind of horrifying speech from Trilzom, like how he was about to kill, torture, or enslave them. The people watched as those large bull-like monsters came down in droves, bumping into each other in frenzied stampede. Many of them fell from varied distances as they made their way down the countless floating island steps. Something in the soil of these otherworldly remnants kept the floating pieces of land suspended in the oxygen of the Earth's atmosphere. Trilzom had control over the gravity, since the cause was a type of gaseous mixture which floated separately from within the Earth's air when mixed. Right when the bull-like cosmic monsters began touching the Earth, the Trilzom race from the extinct constellation began showering down onto Divinacalicata, covering the whole continent in the sky above the crowd of spectators. Those monstrous Trilzom beings must have been the sum of the entire population of their race, as the numbers were so great and many. Trilzom was seen in one moment, and then he was no more, as the numbers were too great for him. Once the piling ceased, it could be seen that Trilzom had been devoured. Geralt and Yennefer feared that this was a trick, and he would return, but once Divinacalicata was seen falling from the sky, this fear became non-existent in their worries. Once the pieces of the otherworldly land fell on top of the monsters, and all were obliterated, everyone realized that the distance was just enough for them to safely watch. If the fall had been a mile closer, then there would have been a greater tragedy. The land was devastated, but there wasn't a single casualty since everyone from the land had gathered to the forest amphitheater. Most of Divinacalicata fell into the sea opposite where Pavetta and Duny were going. Still, a good portion of land on the great continent on Earth was destroyed by the impact. Everyone fell to the ground from the boom. Children were crying and mostly everyone was in a serious panic. A dust bowl came towards the crowd, and in the dust as it cleared could be seen other types of monsters running towards the crowd. These were the armies of the underworld. The ones known as the Naga were the snake people that teamed with the dark sorcerers pretending to be noble druids, yet secretly met under rule of the Count. In those days, the Count was a phantom calling shots from the shadows behind the scenes. Many men fought alongside the disguised snake people. These men were obtained and acquired under Hexation to fight with the serpent people. Geralt was ready for battle, and on that day he killed over 1,000 men and snake people. Yennefer also destroyed with a great burst of fire from her mouth, conducted by her hands. The snake people's numbers dwindled next to nothing, and the score was settled, made even between the Viper Witchers and the Naga. Those Viper Witchers were there in secret amongst the crowd, and were ecstatic at the sight of the near extinction of the Naga, who were the thorn in their sides since their conception. They emerged without fear through the dust and began slaying the snake men ruthlessly with great pleasure. Geralt was in hyper mode as he sliced through the men like a starving man given watch over the royal butcher shop. After Yennefer had torched most of the remaining fallen monsters along with over 1,000 people, both snake people and their armies, more monsters from the edges of the forest came to feast on the cooked flesh, as the aroma incited the monsters' appetite from afar. Some wolves also came to feast, and fought over meat with the monsters. The sign of the wolves meant that the White Wolf Witchers were there as well. Sure enough, they came from out of the deep wilderness of the forest and joined Geralt in battle. He was pleased to see them, and drank his potion with them, giving cheers and good salutation. Then began a hyper-attack on the quick-moving snake people. After having so many there in one place, everyone who fought against them knew they couldn't pass up the chance to eliminate them from the face of the earth. The snake people had done so much harm to the world, the damage was inconceivable. For thousands of years before the otherworldly monsters were ever a threat, the snake people were here from the beginning, tormenting mankind and the pre-human people before them. Mountain lions came to feast after the wolves had come, and this was another sign of the coming of Witchers, who had been gone from the rest of civilization for quite some time. The Cat Witchers had separated themselves since the beginning of the experiments of mutation, after the first couple generations were created by the old Hexers. The first of their kind had been attacked as a boy by a mountain lion, and somehow not only survived, but put out the eyes of the cat. He rubbed his eyes with his own blood from his wounds, as well as the bloody tears of the mountain lion, and that night he realized that by the magic blood in his own veins from the mutation ritual turning him into a witcher against his will, his eyes were like cat's eyes. He could see in the dark. So he set himself apart alone and started a clan family with 4 wives from the start. And all his children were like him, seeing in the dark, becoming nocturnal hunters. They killed monsters in the night and hunted until just before sunup. The Cat Witchers are the only reason the land was safe enough to live in, because if it weren't for them, the nights would be filled with dread in every household, as they used to be in the early days of the Witcher experimentations, when families waited to see if it would be their door next that was knocked in by a monstrous, hateful beast. Geralt said, "I knew this day would come until now. I've been patient in silence." Yennefer said, "I too, Geralt, same as you." Geralt said, "You knew of the sigils, and so you knew of the sects of the Witchers?" Yennefer said, "Yes, I've known as you." Geralt said, "This is something I knew of you, but could not speak of it." And Yennefer said, "I know, no worries. Now, all right?" Geralt said, "Do I look worried?" Yennefer said, "You always look worried, but I know you're not." Geralt said, "You have a magic spell for that?" And Yennefer said, "No, it is a spell I'm under." Geralt of Rivia and Yennefer, the master sorceress, had this little moment in the midst of the insane battle that was the largest single battle in the history of the old world. Of all the Viper Witchers, there was one left by the coast who would come across Duny and Pavetta. He would become their Witcher guard and knight The vipers had secretly been amongst the people of the Forest Kingdom for some time. They followed S in all his coming and going, up to the point of the alliance with Trilzone, and sent their most experienced man for the job concerning Duny and Pavetta, but this was no job. This was duty, for the sake of all. This good deed paid off better than any job. Borch and his daughters caught the hiding Viper Witchers in their secret ways, and learned of their secrecy by accident, which turned out for the best for them, as his daughters would be wed to two of the best warrior witchers of the Viper sect. Borch guided the Viper Witchers along on the path to the forest castle, but were stopped on the way by S. He had fooled them into going to the place where everyone else was at, same as he had fooled everyone else in all of the land. Funny how things turn out, since S turned out to be the fool as he witnessed the destruction of his partner. S was forced to grieve alone while he saw his new friend become overpowered. This was something Skiatukupata thought to be impossible, knowing what he thought he knew about Trilzum, but for all Trilzum's power, it wasn't enough for the numbers of his species. They broke their teeth and jaws while fighting for a chance to bite Trilzum's rock-like flesh. Eventually, the grinding of their teeth and jaws against Trilzum's supreme alien flesh was penetrated, like the grinding together of stones. Eventually, with enough friction, the most solid of materials can be grinded away with persistence, and by sheer persistence, the Trilzum species turned their godlike father, Trilzum, into dust. As the dust from crumbled Divinicalicata swept over the people, an amazing side effect affected the people and the beasts. Everyone, including the animals and monsters, began to fly upwards. They thought they would float away until, at random points, people started to hover in place at different distances within the air. The battle ceased, as no one could reach one another while they found themselves suspended in the air. It was not the breathing of the dust, but the ingesting of the particles from the crumbled floating continent that gave them the power to become like Divinicalicata. This floating lasted until their bodies absorbed the dust enough to further digest, which was faster for some than others, depending on the individual metabolism and weight of each person and creature. When people began to fall to their deaths, and the tragedy became intense, along with the innocent animals, the Queen of the Sea did not care. Queen Sairi did care, however, that her home had been struck with calamity by the crashing of Divinicalicata onto the gates of her home. The fallen continent was so long and large that it took up most of the sea in between both coastlines of the large continent from east to west, where Geralt of Rivia called home. It was a good thing that Divinicalicata did not fall directly onto the center of the large continent of Earth, because most life would have been exterminated, no doubt. Instead, this roused the Queen of the Sea from the depths of her palace in the deep sea. And she had risen from the depths in hot anger. The seas boiled with her fury, and by the wrath of her vengeance, her webbed feet kicked up a straightforward tidal wave, causing a flash flood over the land. She didn't mean to save the people, or the animals, or monstrous beasts, but this is exactly what she did by accident, and a strange blessing from curse coincidence. Yet any sort of Hexer knew there was no such thing as coincidences in life. The wise know this.